About 10 days ago, I made a video on what to do for your plants to prevent cold weather from harming them. We had a massive cold snap, unusually cold, come through my area. I want to do a follow-up video. I'll leave the link to the original video here, but what to do with plants if you get cold damage. Look at these tea olives here beside me. We're going to get into some plant physiology about how plants naturally protect themselves from cold weather and why did this happen to plants. It's not the fact that it got so cold, it was the fact that how fast the temperature dropped. So let's get into it. So depending on who you read, what publication you read, tea olive is going to be hardy zone 8 to zone 7B. I'm right on that line. As you can see, these tea olives got absolutely smoked during that cold snap. I think they're going to be okay. Your tea olives are probably looking like this if you live in North Georgia, North Alabama, Southern Tennessee, Mississippi, over towards the Dallas area. The fact that the leaves have fallen off of these is actually a good sign to me. That's a defense mechanism for plants when they get a little bit too cold, is they'll actually drop their leaves. What I'm looking at now is I'm looking for limbs that are not brittle. They're still limber. That's telling me that these plants are still viable right now. Hopefully in the spring, what we'll see happen is these will put on buds and they'll flush back out. That's my hope. Don't know if that's going to happen. Whatever you do with your plants that have been cold damaged, I would encourage you not to prune them right now. Just let them set. I know they're not sightly. Evergreen shrubs are supposed to be evergreen. We're dealing with unusual circumstances here. But the best thing that we can do right now is to just leave our plants that have been cold damaged alone. Let's walk around the yard. I'm going to show you some more examples of some plants that got snapped by the cold and what I'm going to do to them, or what I'm not going to do to them is probably a better way to put it. Let's go take a look. So off my left-hand shoulder here, this is Loropetalum, and you can see it's been winter damaged pretty heavily. So Loropetalum is a solid zone 7 plant. We really shouldn't be seeing this much damage on Loropetalum. I would somewhat expect to see some damage on tea olive because I'm on the extreme northern edge for where it can grow, but Loropetalum, this is a little surprising. So let's talk about what happened to some of these plants that are traditionally evergreen. It got so cold so fast in our area. We went from 54 degrees to 6 degrees in a matter of about 3 to 4 hours. And plants have defense mechanisms to prevent them from having leaf damage like this. So as it gets colder, they'll actually start to pull water out of the leaves, and it leaves more proteins and sugars in the solution of the leaf, and it almost acts like an antifreeze, if you will. And that water gets stored down in the roots and in extracellular space within the plant. And as we warm up out of the freeze, the water will go back in to the cells of the leaf. What happened, we got so cold so fast that those mechanisms couldn't take place, and we had water freeze inside the leaves of the plant. Not the best situation. So when water turns to ice, it expands. Also, ice can be very rigid. And so we literally busted the cell walls of the plant cells here in some of these plants. That's what happened. That's why these look so rough. I think this Loropetalum is going to be okay. Here again, just like with the tea olives that we looked at there a second ago, there's some brittleness in some of these limbs, but there's also a lot of limbs that are little stems that are going to be limp as well. And that's really what we're after, is looking for stems that are not brittle. I think we'll get buds on these and it'll come back, but we're not going to prune these. We're just got to wait it out until spring and see what happens. Let's go take a look at a few more plants. The same thing that happened to the Loropetalum also happened to my azaleas. These azaleas are hardy all the way up into zone 6. We really shouldn't be seeing any cold damage on these, but it got so cold so fast that the water was still inside the leaves. It didn't have time to evacuate and go down to the roots and the stems. And this is the result. Got a lot of defoliation on these azaleas. I think they'll be okay. The stems are still very supple. If you have azaleas in your yard, don't prune them right now for several reasons. One being, you could extend the damage that's already done, but also, hopefully these will still flower in the spring. If you prune them now, you'll definitely not have flowers. So that's two reasons you don't need to be pruning your azaleas. I know they're unsightly right now, but don't do anything to them. Don't put fertilizer on them, don't prune them. We're gonna wait until April and see what happens with these. I planted these at Kuba last spring. They're still relatively new. You can see how small this one is. They were 3 gallons. There's still a lot of green vegetation on these. I can pull off a leaf right there. That one's a little damaged. But here's one. You can see here, that leaf doesn't have any damage on it. These were marginally damaged. Some of them have black, some of them don't have black. I think they're gonna be okay. On something like this, here again, I'm not gonna do anything until spring. I know this looks terrible, but we've gotta work with what Mother Nature dealt us. Think of it as poker. This was the hand we were dealt, and we've gotta wait for the flop and the turn in the river to see what happens with our plants. I hate it, but it is what it is. So here again with a Kuba, we're gonna sit and wait. Just an example of how bad things got in my area. This is what's left of a Linton Rose or Helleborus. These are hardy all the way up into like zone 5. There's no reason this should have this much cold damage. It's an evergreen for me. It's extremely hardy here. But what we see, the tops of it actually got burnt, and this stuff that's underneath these water oak leaves here, you can see are still green. I think they're gonna be okay. I'm not gonna get any flowers off of these this winter, I think. This is one of the first plants that will flower for me late winter, early spring, February time frame. So here in a few weeks, I would expect this to be bloomed out and be pretty. This year, I don't think we're going to get that, but I do think it will survive. These leaves lower to the ground, that tells me that this should come back from the roots. If you have perennials that have turned mushy, for example, what's left of these daylilies, this is just mushiness. You can go ahead and pull that out. That's not coming back. All this is doing is encouraging bacterial and fungal growth at this point. This is going to continue to mush and decompose, and it stays wet. I'm going to come in here and clean all this up. Traditionally, all these have been evergreen for me. This year, they died all the way back to the crown. I've got one, I don't know if you can see here, off my right-hand shoulder that is still got some green in it. That's a good sign. I think these will come back. But if you have this mushiness in any perennials, go ahead and pull it out, get it out of your bed. Luckily, I have not got around to pine strawing this part of the yard yet, so I can easily get in here, clean this out, and then come back over with pine straw. But that's something to be looking for in your yard, is any perennial that has turned mushy, just go ahead and cut that off. We covered these camellias in the previous video. This was one of the examples. You can probably still see the blanket over here off my left-hand shoulder here that we used to cover it up. I'm still letting it dry. Got a little bit wet out here. Did okay. This camellia did good. This camellia's got some damage to it, but I think it'll be okay. And the one behind it has even more damage. Don't know if that one's gonna make it or not. I'll be honest, it looks pretty rough. There's some brittleness in it. Here again, camellias should be hardy in my area. That is a solid zone 7. I've seen it grown up into zone 6. I'm 8A, 7B, right on the line there. It was just the fact it got so cold so fast that the defense mechanisms for being cold for these plants didn't kick in. I'm hoping they'll be okay, but the one back here in the back I'm really worried about. So if you have camellias, just like with tea olive and Loropetalum, don't prune them, don't do anything to them right now. Wait until about April. Hopefully you see new vegetative buds develop and come out and flush. Then once you see that, if there's any dead remaining, if there's any true dead, you can go in and remove that with a pair of hand snips. Before the hard freeze came in, I had the most beautiful pansies going down both sides of the walk here. I think they're gonna be okay as I look down underneath some of this decomposed stuff, which by the way, this has turned to mush. I need to remove this. There is green vegetative material coming back from the root system on most of these. I don't know if I'll get all of them back, but I should get some of them back. Here again, pansies are extremely cold hardy. We should not see this. It's the fact that it got so cold so fast. And so it just caught everything off guard. And this was the result. I do want to leave you with a positive note. I am seeing lots of bulbs start to poke their heads up through the ground. I'm seeing daffodils and tulips and hyacinths and things like that begin to show up. Spring's around the corner. I know we just went through a very rough winter period, highly unusual for our area. Don't prune anything in terms of evergreen shrubs. If it's a perennial and it turned to mush, cut it off at the ground. Hopefully it'll come back from the roots this coming up spring. And that's all we can do. I know you want to get out there and start to prune or fertilize, but that is the worst thing we can do right now. So I'd highly encourage you not to do that. Guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor. And until next time, happy gardening.